Did you know that the first humans who arrive in Greece then disappear towards the end of the last ice age? And then they are much later replaced with the so-called Neolithic peoples from the so-called Near East. This will be a continuing theme of Greece's human history. New people, new language, new cultures, they'll come again and again, typically from the East. But it is with the second wave of diffusion or migration from the Near East that the foundations of classical Greece as we know it are set. There are many ways to represent the Neolithic period. Typically we say it exists between 10 to 4000 BC. So that's a bloody long time ago. And this period exemplifies what paleoanthropologists call the tectonic phase of human evolution. Tectonic comes from the Greek word tectoniko, and it pertains to building or carpentry. So it's a pretty fitting word, for the tectonic phase of human evolution refers to the human construction of the cultural world. It is inseparable from expanding brain activity, the development of language, tools, and art. Tools are found in the evolutionary phase that comes before the tectonic, which is known as the phase of speciation. However, speciation refers to a process of co-evolution between genetic composition, the genotype, and new behaviours that genetic composition enable. These behaviours are transmitted culturally, which means that they are refined and passed down through primitive acts of teaching and learning. And this includes teaching and learning how to make stone tools. This mechanism is estimated to have lasted for more than 1 million years. 1 million years of biological evolution. And it finalises around 150,000 years in our past. And where does it finalise? Well, in East Africa, of course. See, according to this theory, we are all descendants of African humans. When I say all, I'm talking about the modern human being. All modern human beings share the same genotype, which is what makes them modern human beings. The genotype really means that they all have, or we all have, the same basic DNA. I mean, I do like to think I'm not human sometimes, but alas I am. I have the same basic DNA sequence as you watching right now. That's the sequence of the nucleus of the cell. For this reason, contemporary molecular genetics suggests that, other than the normal distribution range that is seen in all populations, such as in IQ, height, pigmentation of eyes and skin, facial features, and so on, all humans are indeed born equal. We are literally the same, let's say, race. Indeed, so-called racial differences are really bloody trivial in comparison to this continuity in the human genome, and are a result of what is known as microevolutions, which is relatively trivial genetic changes that occur in isolated or fairly isolated populations and in accordance with the specifics of their regional environment. The more pronounced and profound differences in modern humans are generally understood to be cultural, not genetic. And indeed, that's really the distinction between the tectonic and speciation phase that comes before it. There is sort of cultural learning in speciation, but it's not culture as we really understand it. It's rather setting the template in accordance with biological evolution. By the time we get to the tectonic phase, the human genotype is fixed, it's set in stone, which means that the evolution of the tectonic phase, though dependent on the previous genetic phase of speciation, is now principally one of consciousness, language, and culture. Some linguists and philosophers of mind have even argued that consciousness is language, and as language is culturally specific, so too is consciousness. Consciousness, in other words, doesn't just arise in isolation. Put differently, consciousness is inherently social and so relative to the society and the historical circumstances in which it emerges. So, it is at the tectonic phase that we get cultural differentiation. The earliest signs of the tectonic phase are found in France and Spain and are dated towards the end of the Old Stone Age. I'm referring specifically to the cave art of animals we find in the cave of Altamira and Montignac. But these are exceptions that prove the rule. The tectonic phase does not hit full swing until the Neolithic period, following hot on the heels of that period's agricultural revolution. Indeed, this has led many to speak of a sapient paradox. What accounts for this huge gap from the first established appearance of Homo sapiens in Europe, modern humans, some 40,000 years ago, and even earlier in Western Asia and the so-called Near East, to the earliest agricultural revolution of the Neolithic period, some 10,000 years ago? Why such a gap? How is it that once we evolved into a uniform genotype with certain shared genetic traits and cultural capabilities, why is it took nearly half a millennia to realise that potential, to hit the tectonic phase proper? And what prompted it? These are all questions that continue to invite a variety of answers and guesswork. Whatever the answer, we do know that the first Eastern migrants to Greece after the initial wave out of Africa to Greece were Mesolithic, or rather from the Middle Stone Age. That means they come before the Neolithic, which means New Stone Age. So Mesolithic is in between the old and the new. Meso, the middle. But the Mesolithic people used tools and they had art. Little embellished pebbles with swirly lines. Are they another exception that proves the rule? Or the other? Does it disprove the rule? I think it's best to see these people in a transitional sense, somewhere between the speciation and the tectonic cultures, which means the Neolithic farmers are in many ways anticipated by their Mesolithic predecessors, but not outdone by them. You see, these distinctions are useful to study, for understanding, but they do not necessarily capture the nuances, the variation, and the alinear development that is typical of human evolution and human systems. Increasingly in the scientific world, we call this complexity, which is a misleadingly simple term, ironically. Now, remember, the Neolithic period persists for some 4,000 years. It's going from, now I'm using a different dating system, 9,000 years before present to 5,000 years before present. That's a dating system that avoids using all the BC AD stuff. It's not as ethnocentric. Now, going by the stratigraphic record at the Fracinti cave, so that's layers of rock sediment, the transition from the Mesolithic to the Neolithic appears to show uninterrupted habitation. Nevertheless, there is a distinct changeover with Neolithic elements occurring in about 30 centimeters of the same stratum as the Mesolithic. I mean, that's not really 30 centimeters. These elements show a sudden and significant social, cultural, and economic change. First, there are signs of early metallurgy, specifically with silver, gold, and copper. Pigments from the minerals of copper ore and ochre are used to colour clay pots and figurines. The artistic infancy of the Mesolithic people is superseded by complex artisanship. These are not simple pots. They are glazed, requiring temperatures high enough to fuse the metallic pigments. They're also of two tones, requiring two or more separate firings and a precise experimental knowledge of clays, pigments, and fuels. The designs vary extensively between sites and periods, particularly after 7,500 before present. So that's 7,500 years roughly before this very moment. This means that each village of the Neolithic period in Greece had production capability and its own unique sense of identity. There is still an adherence to the basic elements of design across the region, however, certainly in the geometric properties and proportions. It's a general unity of style. Numerous anthropomorphic and zoomorphic, so pertaining to humans and animals, so human and animal clay models, numerous of these are found in houses constructed of mud bricks and built on stone foundations, topped with a thatched roof covered with a thick layer of clay, which itself was painted in bright, exuberant colours taken from natural minerals. The roofs also came with smoke holes for indoor fireplaces. The houses had doors, not just holes, and decorated windows, though not made of glass, of course. Some houses were even 2 stories. So that's pretty advanced for a people that lived thousands upon thousands of years ago. We are closer to the ancient Greeks of 5th century Athens than the ancient Greeks of 5th century Athens are to the Neolithic farmers. That's how far back they go. Now, speaking of these people, a series of housing communities or Neolithic villages appear today as mounds and are numerous around the city of Larissa in modern-day Thessaly. Archaeologists found terracotta figurines in a number of these villages as well, typically hominoid in form, so some kind of human form, and they are similar in their abstractness but distinct in their forms. In other words, across the sites, they're all abstract, but the specific form these abstractions take vary. They do tend to be female or ambiguous, with no facial features and very exaggerated bodily features, so either like a big bum, misshaped heads, large arms, those kind of things. The Neolithic people, like their Mesolithic predecessors, possessed obsidian from Melos, so it seems that sea trade was one of the things to continue from the Mesolithic to the Neolithic. It means the region stayed connected for a considerable time, with people trading in things as well as ideas and culture. In fact, some of this Neolithic trade reached as far as modern-day Poland, and large honey-coloured flint blades in Greece may have been imported from as far away as modern Bulgaria. Another big step in the Neolithic period is the domestication of animals and, relatedly, the forming of new species. Those that we rely on today, such as pigs, sheep and cows. Plants were also domesticated and grains cultivated. In a manner of speaking, this was the start of genetically modified living, the very first GM food, if you like. It is likely through such a sophisticated economy centered on agriculture and trade that the general unity in culture and artistic style came to emerge. Indeed, there are many other things we can find in the Neolithic sites across Greece that suggest this. Archaeologists have found remains of woven wool and the spindles used for, well, weaving the wool. The ability to weave wool from sheep and hair from goats made these animals more valuable to their communities than as just simply meat. So, with this technology comes more than domestication of animals. There comes expertise in their continued maintenance and trade. There becomes husbandry. What else did our Neolithic farmers have? Well, stone axes appear and prove necessary for forest clearing, an activity vital for a farming people in need of a large fertile plain or large fertile plains. Remember, a lot of the natural plains were lost to the rising sea levels that came at the end of the last ice age. Well, I say remember, you might just not know that. Now you do! The process of forest clearing recorded by the pollen record accelerated after 4,500 before present, or before now. By 4000 before present, the soil erosion caused by excessive forest clearing occurred in many parts of Greece. This was exacerbated by the steady change in climate to warmer and drier weather. Land became arid and very plain. This contributed in creating a landscape of rocky slopes covered with low, woody shrubs. Plants requiring less water and, well, soil to survive. So all in all, that's not such a bad thing. Plants such as the olive tree. The effect of forest clearing cannot be understated. It would determine both the landscape and the social life of Greece for the next several thousand years. The period between the end of the Neolithic period and the start of the early Bronze Age shows signs of a great population shift from the hills in Greece to the fertile valley bottoms. It coincides with the geological evidence that soil began eroding from the slopes. The remote settlements high in the interior valleys were abandoned for the lower valleys, the outer valleys, the valleys closer to the sea. Indeed, the population becomes dense this way, pushed closer together and thereby laying the foundations for what would emerge as a proto-urban settlement or series of settlements, later principalities, and much, much later city-states, and much, much, much later nation-states. It is between 3000 to 2800 BC that we find Neolithic settlements in Attica. Remember, Attica is the region of Athens, and this includes the caves and overhangs of the Acropolis of Athens. Excavations at a cave in Attica in Marathon, also known as the Cave of Pan, and 47 kilometers northeast of the Acropolis, produced large amounts of Neolithic pottery of the type already discussed. These have been dated to around 5 to 4000 BC. Another cave in New Makri, south of Marathon, has revealed part of a settlement of several small houses of Middle Neolithic date. These houses run alongside the earliest known street in the region. The timing of all these late Neolithic settlements fits with the theory of soil erosion and degradation by excessive farming. It would have, as mentioned, pushed the people out of the interior to the valleys and as a consequence closer to the shores and closer together. Indeed, most of the sites are within 10 miles of the coast. Okay, so these people, we know they come from the east, we know they're farmers. But beyond that, who are they really? And how did they get from the east to Greece? The general culture and social life we find in Thessaly is consistent with those we find in the Anatolian plateau, such as Katal Hayuk. Now this is pretty noteworthy because everything from the house forms, so stone foundations with mud brick walls, pottery with red and white decorations, to the figurines and reclining, sitting, standing, females with abstract features, all these things are basically practically the same. Now some have suggested that this is a continuity of cult, even inferring a shared matrifocal form of religion, which means centered on women as mothers. And perhaps this was a symbol for the fertility of the land, the fertile crescent, the planting of seeds, later represented by classical goddesses like Demeter and Cora. Gaia, the Earth Mother, is to the classical Greeks a goddess of this order, the first in fact, the oldest, and perhaps an extension of this matrifocal tradition. Now as for where they came from, Asia Minor is the proximal source of Neolithic farmers, so this correspondence with the site in Anatolia kind of makes sense. And the pattern of the first settlements, which is at first focused on the larger islands and coastal areas of Greece, or the interiors relatively close to the sea, suggest a demic diffusion by sea. So how did they get to Greece? Well, I guess in some little boats. Now there's another question from this. Why did they migrate? Why take the risky journey across the seas? Well, one theory suggests that as farming established itself in the Near East, it led to a substantial population growth. I mean, that kind of makes sense, right? And the growth would push outwards or advance like a wave in search of space and land required for agricultural life. Now this theory, unsurprisingly, is called the wave of advance. The population advances from the core to the periphery, from the Near East to Greece in the West and other places, but we're talking about Greece. The Neolithic farmers constitute a second wave or demic diffusion from the east, which we estimate to have happened or started to happen around 9000 BC. Now, very few Mesolithic sites survive this period, and a great deal of speculation has gone into understanding why this is. But it is likely for this reason that there was some but very limited interaction and so continuity between Mesolithic and Neolithic people. Both got their obsidian from Melos, for example. So there's some kind of crossover, but also some kind of distance between the two. It's a bit hazy. We end the episode with a better idea of the first civilization to inhabit Attica. The civilization is comprised of Neolithic farmers from the east, and they come with potentially a very particular matrifocal form of religion. They may even have crossed over with their Mesolithic predecessors, and certainly they both got their obsidian from the same place. Now what's important is that these Mesolithic farmers are not the first wave of migrants from the east or Near East, but probably the second, and more significant given that they brought with them seafaring and farming techniques that laid the foundations of the early Bronze Age civilizations that spring up in the 3rd millennium BC. It is here that speciation is well and truly replaced with tectonic development and cultural differentiation. That's it for the episode today. Thank you so much for listening, for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it informative. And above all else, I hope you have questions, because I want to hear those questions. I want to respond to those questions and maybe respond to them with another video. So let's give that a go. Please, any question you have, put it down at the bottom. And if you really want to support what we're doing, please consider joining our Patreon community. Details below, for the cost of what? I don't know, like about a coffee a month or something like that. Anyway, that's enough from me. Yassas.